Well, welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge, everybody. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, for yet another enchanting evening of something. I don't know what the enchantment would be today. It's been a slow news week, actually. Just trying to make sure that all the buttons are pushed and all the rest of this jazz. Is tough being your own engineer, especially when you're not good at anything. Why is this Bill Whittle guy not moving? I got a still picture of this clown. Play. Come on. I don't know. I keep telling myself this is going to be the last week. And fortunately, this will be the last week. But it is, yeah, I'm just going to assume that it's working because my playback here is not happening at all. Which is good because we don't want to, we don't want to set any standards that we might have to live up to at some point in the future. Now, my playback's completely locked up. But who cares? I'm just going to put this little panel over here so I can see this. Yeah, okay, sweet. All right, excellent. So I hope everybody's doing well. Good to see you. Was it last week I was gone? I think it was. Double check. Yes, of course it was. My gosh, we had a good time, my beautiful wife and I. We really did. It's one of the best times ever, actually. We took the train out on Amtrak to Pismo Beach. I know what you're thinking, nothing but the finest for Mrs. Whittle. But it's a fun place, and I have to tell you, the train ride actually changed my life. Now, my wife, Natasha, has been all around the world, all around Europe. She's been to Egypt. She's been everywhere. It's a mixed blessing. It's tough sometimes to drive down the 405 freeway and have your wife tell you that the road is in worse condition than the streets in Istanbul or in Cairo. But anyway, that's the downside. The upside is she's been everywhere, and she said it was the most comfortable transportation she's ever experienced, and I thought so too. And it was so wonderful. It's 4 hours to Pismo Beach. It's 45 minutes in my airplane, which I'm be selling, by the way. I'll get to that in a second. And about a 3.5 hour drive, 4.5 hours by train. So that train is not going very fast, but it goes right down the coastline, surf spray on the window, that kind of thing. And it is amazing. And on the way back, I had this idea because it had never, ever occurred to me, needless to say, I'd heard of these things. But on the way back, I decided we really wanted to take Amtrak to Chicago or New Orleans or something, because it is so much more comfortable than an airplane, and just getting on it is so much more comfortable. None of this nonsense with TSA and all the rest of it. There's so much room, and the seats go so far back. You got a sleeper car or something that would be fantastic. And for those of you who wonder why train cars are so much more comfortable than airplane cabins, the answer is that the train doesn't have to fly. But other than that, it's fantastic. And in fact, it was so comfortable and it was so comfortable that was the first time I ever realized that this is not so much transportation as just a vacation. So I'm really thinking we might do it. Get a sleeper car, and they've got the big observation cars, and just kind of sit there and watch the world go by. And it also is different. I mean, needless to say, I like the view up there in the sky. But there's something about going through people's backyards, I mean, it's just like sitting in front of the greatest TV screens in the world and watching the world go by you as you go, but it has the added benefit of being real. By the way, that Amtrak, for those of you who are familiar with Southern California, you'll know that if you're going to go from Los Angeles out to Pismo Beach, you go through Santa Barbara, and then the 101 takes a turn and heads through Santa Maria, that kind of thing, and then goes into Pismo kind of from the inside, because the entire end of that peninsula belongs to Vandenberg Air Force Base, and I had never been there, ever. I'd never flown over that space. It's extremely restricted, and Vandenberg Air Force Base has got to be the size of Belgium. It's just astonishing how huge it is, and and since it was all on the base, there was a solid 45 minutes of that trip inside the boundaries of Vandenberg, where it was essentially pristine California coastline where there were no development. There was a little stop there called Surf for Air Force personnel to hit the beach and stuff. But it is just incredibly beautiful, and it is huge. And every now and then, I mean, that's how big the base was. You're just traveling along, and there's a SpaceX hangar, and you go for another 10 minutes. There's a United Launch Alliance hangar, and there's something that looks like a very very sophisticated radar station, and so on and so forth. And Sid says he's been on the beach there, and I envy you, Sid. That was one of the nicest, certainly the nicest looking beach I've ever seen in California. And it was just really cool. And it made me want to go, do one of the launches, because while you can't watch the launch from the base, having seen the base, it would be just great to watch from as far south as you could get on Pismo. Anyway, so we did that, and we had ourselves a real lovely time. We went bowling. Like I say, nothing but the finest for my beautiful wife. But she had gone bowling once or twice before with people who told her that she wasn't very good, and that's just, who does that, really? Ex-boyfriends do that. That's who. And with a little encouragement, she was really getting the hang of it. It was really fun. She got a strike before I did. So she's probably going to do to me in bowling what she did to me in shooting, which is basically outclass me immediately, and I'll have, I don't know, there'll be a couple things left I can still do. We just got from Merlin said, if you go to Pismo Beach, go to F. McClintock Steakhouse, and we didn't, but we will next time. Anyway, so we went bowling, and she had a lot of fun doing that. We had a lot of fun doing everything. Had a lovely evening back at the hotel, and then the next day we went out on Pismo Dunes. For those of you who have seen those dunes, it's like being on the moon. It's just unbelievable, and it just goes on and on and on. And so instead of renting two individual little ATVs, we rented a two-seater. And I drove around out there, and then we found kind of a flat spot and switched seats, and Natasha started driving. And, at first she's kind of timid, and I had this running bet going with myself, and I won. I knew that within 2 minutes by my watch, she was going to start gunning it. And sure enough, she surely did. Once she got the hang, by the way, this wasn't the first time she's driven on the dunes. This is really the first time she's driven, ever. Not ever, but, So, so she just got in there and rolled us around, and we had ourselves a fine old time. So it was a really great vacation, and a very, very lovely anniversary. It was just a beautiful place to be, and there you go. So that's why we missed last week. In other news, I am going to be selling my Long Easy. I almost said I'm sorry to say, but the fact is I haven't flown it in 18 months, and I have such conflicted feelings about this. If you're a pilot, I don't expect anybody who's not a pilot to really understand this in their bones. But I don't miss it, because having flown 1,000 hours in Southern California, I've been everywhere you can go in Southern California 100 times. I mean, I've been everywhere 100 times. So I don't miss the flying, but and I'm not selling it, just selling it because I'm not flying it. I don't miss the flying, but I carry this weird sense of shame about kind of being, an ex-pilot. And I know I'm not an ex-pilot. I mean, it's not like I've given up flying forever. As a matter of fact, I'm hoping to pick up a nicer airplane in a couple years, maybe, something a little more reliable. But I don't miss it. And part of that is I've been doing an awful lot of flying in the computer, which I would normally have nothing but contempt for. but at least the stuff that I fly over in Star Citizen is not stuff I've seen 200 times before. And I'm going to miss the airplane a lot. But here's the thing: while I have it, I don't miss it. So it's just one of those. It's one of those. I guess just a big milestone, you know. I ended up about. I say I got to stop saying ended up. As of the moment, I want to say I've got 967 hours, something like that. And by the way, just so you all know, Natasha has never, ever, ever said don't go flying or I don't want you to fly. Nothing, never. But I know it worries her, and one of the this is by the way this is our that's rather a personal question, sir. Evening personal questions only. But to my utter amazement, when I picked her up when she first came here, I was driving the way I drove in L.A. And it made her a little bit nervous. She'd been in some collisions with other drivers back in Russia, and then so I slowed down. And then, to my astonishment, I didn't speed back up again when she's not in the car. I just, it's been 2 years now, and every now and then I'll be driving along and I'll be in the slow lane, in the far right lane. I'll be doing 2 or 3 miles an hour under the speed limit. And I'll say, what the hell happened to you, man? Stout Cat says that, of course, it worries Natasha. She expects to get many years of wear out of you. She's going to get many years of wear and tear out of me, but she'll just do it in 6 months. The first episode of Jag is about the hero, his guilt about no longer being a pilot. Yeah, it is. It is. It's something I feel guilty about, not flying. And I expect to be back there someday. In something considerably more reliable like a Bearcoot. Right now, I've got a bunch of things to get done, and you know that's that. So I'm gonna be sorry when it's gone, but I haven't been in the hangar in 5 months. You know, it's just crazy like that. Anyway, sometimes people keep things like that, or sometimes they'll keep maybe a job or some membership in a club or something, that they never go to anymore, just because they feel like, to lose it would be to lose it. Yeah, the Chase Lounge got it exactly right. I actually have something to live for now, so that makes all the difference in the world. So that is that. And things continue apace. I will make this exceedingly brief because I know some people start to get a rash. Prickly heat breaks out. 2 weeks ago, I was sure no way I was going to make this deadline of 1st of October. And I still am not convinced that I will. But all of these skill sets that I've had to learn over the last year or two, relearn, are now coming up to the level where everything's starting to look really good. So if I can just render like a crazy man and put stuff on tape, I've got stuff actually on disc now. It's going to show up in the actual video. So I'll be looking forward to getting that done, and then I can relax a little bit, and we'll see what happens. Edward Smith wants to know if that plane does well in the resale market. It usually can do pretty well, Edward, but it's not going to do well for me because I'm pretty sure I overpaid for it. That's probably because I just wanted it, and I was dealing with somebody who was, either a very good salesman or wasn't like 100% committed to wanting to sell it. In any event, I will certainly get less for it than what I paid for it. But I got my money's worth out of that airplane. I mean, if I didn't get anything back, I got my money's worth out of that airplane. And people talk about renting, if you could rent long easies, I'm sure I wouldn't have such a problem. But besides, I don't want to rent. Ownership is important, and there are some things that are, renting certain kind of cars or an SUV or renting a 4-seat airplane or something. But ownership is important, and it was as important as this is my airplane, it's my hangar, and I just went flying, and now I've gotten out of it, and see you later, airplane. Yeah, it's certainly not one of these cases where my beautiful wife said it's one or the other. It's just, on the contrary. On the contrary, she's. Hello. What the hell is going on? What is that sound and where is it coming from? I know what the sound is. Hang on a minute. It's not my phone. It's the little ringtone from Windows. I should have turned that volume down anyway. There we go. So, yeah, I did not do the canopy. I was about to. By the time I wanted to redo the canopy, I wanted to put retractable gear in it and so on, and it was actually FaceTime. That's why I never get a FaceTime call. And I wanted to put retractable gear in it and so on. I just realized, and go as fast as we can. And I realized that's a Bearcoot. The Bearcoot is 170 grand. It's 5 times what I paid for. Yeah, at least. Anyway, so that's just a little milestone that everybody who's been watching the show for a long time got to see from the beginning, and I sure did have a lot of fun in it, and we will see what happens. Yeah, a couple people saying they're only getting still images. I was only getting still images, and I don't know what the problem is, but we'll get over it eventually. Twitch looks really good. I keep wondering why I'm not on Twitch, and the answer is because I haven't taken the 10 or 15 minutes it needs for me to do it, which is the story of my life, essentially. I got behind back in 1979, I think. I got about 15 minutes late, and I've been 15 minutes late ever since then. I just can't seem to catch up. So anyway, that is that. So I have not looked at the questions yet. I was thinking about this personal questions issue, or rather edition, and I thought, I've always been honest. I've never ever not taken a question, maybe one that I can think of. And I just kind of realized I don't want to make more out of this than it is, But when I was thinking about it earlier today, I thought, no, you need to do it. It's almost like one of these, lemon juice detox kind of things where you do nothing but drink lemon juice for a while. It's good to get a lot of it's just good to be honest with people and keep them up to date on things. It's very much like confession, I suppose. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to start doing that right now. So let me do my little thingy here and move my little duty there, and we'll see what we get going here. So I hope everybody's been well. It's been kind of a slow news month, thank God. It just seemed like kind of a fun thing to do. All right, so I got to split this up here. I'm going to take you, Facebook page. You're going to go over there, and I'm going to be able to read from you. See, a person who was a professional, who did this for a living, would have had all of this stuff set up a long time ago. And I would have done it, but I know that our regulars would be heartbroken. And that's the reason why I don't, why the show doesn't look better, and why I don't prepare for it more. I know that the people who've been watching this show forever, well, first they'll be frightened and confused if the thing was technically competent, and secondly, I think I'd start getting, concerned calls and letters. So anyway, here we are. All right, so stick a plastic straw in my bottle. Don't get me started on these lunatics. Here we go. Personal questions, starting with, hang on. I'm going to read them in the order they are. I don't know how Facebook does the order it does, but it does the order it does, and that's how I'm going to read them. So there we go. Cheryl Toomey says, well, you asked for it. I know that after 30 plus years in education, I've become disheartened by my chosen profession and continue to toy with walking away from it. The only thing that stops me are my students and their parents. I am still needed and can still do some good, so I really and truly get it. Could it be possible that your enthusiasm for your new project partially stems from you being burned out on the talking heads format and politics in general? Could this be considered the semi-retirement that you mentioned a couple of years ago? That's a superb question. A couple years ago, I want to say right around 2014 or 15, I said I think I'm going to go through the election of 2016. At that point, I'm probably going to hang it up for a bit. And I just, for the life of me, cannot remember what I thought I would be doing. I thought I was quite sure I had something worked out or anything, but in any event, if I had actually done it, if I'd actually hung up the spurs, I suspect they would have been hung on the wall for 5 days, maybe 5 hours, something like that. Yeah, I love doing this, and I'm never going to stop doing this. Can't afford to. Can't afford to stop doing this. Got a lot of wildlife to feed. With that said, and this is important. This new work is not semi-retirement. You landed on a bunch of the issues square on. I've done. I couldn't even guess, but I've certainly done 6,000 videos, including the right angles. I think I've done something like 400 afterburner firewalls. It's just difficult to think of a way to say things, in a new way. So it's not a question of like semi-retirement or anything else. Listen, this is, I told you guys, to be honest, this is a family affair, right? This is a family show for all of us who've been in this for a while. To some degree, I'm a little bored with it. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood about this, because if I was bored with politics, I wouldn't be doing the 18, 19 hours a day that I'm putting in trying to get this other project done. When I say I'm a little bored with it, what I mean by that is I'm a little bored with the format, and I think the format needs to change. And I think I'm not talking necessarily about doing the video game videos, computer-generated videos, but even just the personal commentary. The more effort I put into them, the fewer people see it. And I really think that I'd be much more successful. I certainly would be happier instead of going to all of this enormous trouble and green screen and then pulling 200 photos and just all of it. I just get out the iPhone and just say what's on my mind, put a couple of jump cuts in there and do it. So yeah, it's not retiring from there either. But the most important aspect to this question is the part that I haven't really touched on yet. And it's clearly the most important aspect of this question, and that is, I've been asked almost since the beginning, certainly since the beginning, really, of a year or two at PJTV, why I don't get more exposure, why I don't have a radio show, why I don't have any of these, these things that other people who do this have. And the strange truth of it is that this is my third choice in life. First one being a fighter pilot astronaut, and the second one being a filmmaker. And when I realized about a year ago that I could put the two of them together, I just been on fire ever since then. I mean, I've put 6 hours a day into this for a year, over a year. Fortunately, my wife is we're so much alike. It's just, it's amazing. She has a lot of interest and time and work to do on her stuff. So she's in one room. I'm a few feet away in another room. She's working on her photographs, and I'm working on building this little toy set. But here's the point. And this is really the point, because I know it bugs a lot of people, and I know a lot of people are disappointed, and I know a lot of people and they have a right to be. But the thing that is most important about this is that when I got into punditry, I was able to put down what's in my head, but everything I've done, and it's been 10 years now, has pretty much been first person singular, me lecturing people or trying to explain things to people, and that's all great. But there are so many tools that I never get to use, ever. And just to be able to do it is incredibly fun for me. It's just fun. It's fun to be able to talk to actors and get actors to do voiceovers and motion capture, and then eventually do movies. It's fun to. In this particular project, I've done every single thing. I've done every atom of it. I've been a costume designer. I've been a casting director. I've been a set builder and designer. It's all of it. I've been a set painter. I'm doing all this stuff by myself, and I love it because I get a chance to get into so many different aspects of story. I'm going to an enormous amount of trouble. Just genuinely, just a crazy mountain of work in order to tell, in order for one line. I'm doing all of this for one line, all of it. And because I happen to think that people seeing that one line and that one instant will have more effect on more people than any of my Second Amendment or guns videos have done, and some of them have done very well. I've been saying from the beginning, because back to the radio station and TV shows and all the rest of that stuff, I never really felt like this was my first job. I never really wanted to. Let me rephrase that. I never really wanted to make a commitment that would keep me away from the entertainment. And it's been 10 years in coming, and I'm just gonna ask people to just be patient as you can be and hang on just a little bit longer, because I think when you'll see it, you will really at least understand why I've gone to the trouble and the time and effort for this. But folks, there is so much that I can do that I couldn't do in firewall format or on this show or on right angle. And I get to experience 5-6 hours of it every day. And I am voracious. I never stop. I'm always, there's a new 3D model. That would be awesome. I know what I can. In fact, it's given me an idea for an entirely new scene. Today I listened to probably 50 tracks of music that you can purchase. Some of it's very good, but I like. It wasn't what I was looking for, and this brings up another interesting question, issue rather, I suppose I should say. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned on this show that one of my favorite moments in film ever was in Ed Wood, which I liked very much. Ed Wood's the story of Ed Wood, who is generally agreed to be the worst director who ever lived. And it's a wonderful film. I love it. I just love it. Johnny Depp's terrific in it, and Walter Matthau's terrific in it. Walter Matthau. Martin Landau. So it's just a great film. But my favorite part of it by far is there's a scene in Ed Wood after a big setback. Ed Wood just loves making movies. And he kind of worships Orson Welles the way everybody did. Orson Welles had done the Citizen Kane and Magnificent Ambersons by then. And there's a scene in this movie, which I'm sure is fictional. That's okay. It's also true. Where Ed Wood is really depressed and he goes to Musso and Frank's, I think it is, and sits at the bar. And he's really, drinking and he's sad. He looks into the back room, the private room, and its doors just open a crack. And there's one person back there in the entire room. It's late afternoon. And that person is Orson Welles, and he's sitting there working on a script. So Ed Wood goes up and talks to him. And they have a neat little conversation, but this was the point where I actually stopped paying attention to the movie for a moment. because I was just fascinated by the fact that here's the world's worst director sitting right next to the world's best director, and what's the difference between them? What's the difference? They both love making movies. They both have experience making movies. What is the difference between Ed Wood and Orson Welles? And I'm convinced that the difference is pretty much this. There's a scene earlier in Ed Wood where he's got Tor Johnson, the guy used as a wrestler, used him as a monster, kind of an ogre kind of guy. And there's a scene in the movie he's shooting, and he's got Tor Johnson carrying this unconscious blonde out of a room. And as he comes out of the door, he accidentally swings around a little bit, and her foot hits the side of the door jamb. And because it's a set, the whole wall, it's just a flat, and the whole wall vibrates just a little bit. So they finish the shot, and the director of photography says, all right, we'll set it up, we'll do it again. And Ed Wood says, nah, fine, print it. No one's going to notice. And then contrast that with Orson Welles, who reportedly would take 2 or 3 days to light one shot in Citizen Kane, to light it. And you realize that the difference between the people who are very good and the people who are awful, or even the people that are very, very good versus the people that are okay, or even just good, is, and I watch my wife do this all the time, is that people who have the ability to do top-level work sweat the details. I remember so clearly when I started doing these videos, I think it was the first or second firewall I did. And we were working on a real slow machine, and the rendering took, I want to say 6 hours, 7 hours or something. And we looked at the final product, and there was a 1 pixel black line that went down the right side of the frame from where I hadn't sized the frame correctly. It was 1 pixel wide. It's as narrow as it gets, just on one side. And I had to do it again. I had to re-render it. And everybody was saying, you're out of your mind. Nobody's going to see this. I'm going to see it. And all I'm going to think about is that black line that shouldn't be there. So the reason I'm having so much fun with this and putting in so much time is because it's giving me a chance to flex muscles that I've had before I started doing political commentary, and that give me such a range of opportunity. And we talked about hiding the message. I'm not going to get into any of that too much, but there is one other aspect to these messages that I've been working on, and that is not only that they will reach people who we're not reaching now. That's the primary motivation for it. I mean, the map of millennials voting is blue from coast to coast except for Utah. Very, very wide, extremely shallow. So the reason I'm doing them is to get the message in front of people who don't get the message, because they're not going to come and watch Firewalls or Afterburners. They're just not. I'd like it if they did, but they're not. And even if they wanted to, we can't get them to them because of Facebook shadow banning and YouTube shadow banning. I have 107,000 YouTube subscribers, and I'll put out a video like Right Angle or something. It'll be seen by 8,000 people, which is a decent number compared to what we were getting before. But there's no way that it's showing up on the page of everybody who clicked subscribe to my channel. There's just no way it's happening, and everybody thinks it's what they're getting. So it is an incredible opportunity. But here's what I was talking about this one other aspect of it, and that is that this is the mental frame at which that's funny, Friday. This is the aspect of it that really nobody really seems to understand. I didn't understand it for a while either. If I sit down and watch a political video, Prager video or something like that, whatever, and especially if I'm either neutral or somewhat against the idea, if I can be compelled to watch it, I'll watch it, but I'll watch it kind of, like this, and I'll watch it. And if it's extremely good, like most of the Prager stuff is, it may get past my defenses and get me to think about things. But that is not the attitude that people have when they go to movies or watch television. nobody goes into a movie. Well, critics do, but nobody goes to see a film they want to see and just sits there with their arms crossed and like, come on, let's go, get your point out. So and it's the biggest miracle, really. It's what makes show business work and stories work, and it works because we convey information to each other through stories. And I talked about the whites of our eyes being specially evolved just so that we can determine what that person is looking at, exactly where they're looking. I'm very good with sight lines. I spend a lot of time on sight lines. So when you go to a movie or when you're watching television, or anything on Facebook that you want to watch that you're being entertained on, you don't have to watch it. You don't. I mean, look, the Prager videos are fantastic, and I've seen a bunch of them. But I would never say that I was. If I'm in the mood for entertainment, a Prager video is not where I go. I go there for education. I don't go there for entertainment. So, so when people go to the movies, they make a subconscious decision that goes back to the caves or earlier, sitting around the campfire, and that we certainly must be wired for. It certainly has a pro survival characteristic because it's been selected for. And IOYAS ADC, which is an acronym for something, says I have shark's eyes. I do. They're not quite black, but in the high contrast world of this camera, I've had many people tell me I look like a shark, that they're just these black eyes like a doll. So I've seen, and Bone Canoe says if I'm familiar with the popularity of edutainment, I am. The sales pitch for this thing is not edutainment, it's entertainment. It's what it is. There's a difference. And the difference is that when you're being educated, you're engaging your upper level cortical functions. When you are being entertained, on the other hand, you're not only not using those, you are consciously and willingly relaxing them. This is that ancient adaptation that we've had that served us so well. It's in the trade. It's called the willing suspension of disbelief. In other words, I'm going to suspend my disbelief, and I'm going to do it on purpose. And the easiest way to describe this is to say, how many times have you been scared by some horror movie and the slashers coming out of the closet, and people jump a foot out of their chairs, and there's 400 people sitting shoulder to shoulder in air-conditioned comfort in the dark eating popcorn on a Saturday afternoon, but they're not in the theater. They're on the boat. Their consciousness moves to where the filmmaker wants it to move. Not just their eyes, their consciousness. That's how it works. And when you do that, you lower your defenses. And this is how the left has taken over this amazing country. Their ideas are so awful and there's so much murder behind them and failure, but they're smart enough to come at us when we have our defenses not only down, but we are willingly going to go with them on an episode of some left-wing show like All in the Family, for example. How many hundreds of those did I watch, not realizing that Norman Lear had something very important to say to me, and it was only because he was fighting such an uphill fight that he didn't make Mike Stivic into the hero he wanted him to be. That was the voice of Norman Lear. Archie Bunker, who was supposed to be the foil and the laughingstock, he became the hero because you can't fight that much reality. But the point of it is, I watched all of these shows, and I've watched all of these movies. And before I started thinking about politics, I thought that Vietnam was like it was in Platoon or Apocalypse Now. And then I talked to guys who've actually been in Platoon, in Vietnam rather, and I realized it's nothing like that. But I was ready to believe it in the same way that I'm ready to believe in werewolves and vampires, and I'm ready to believe in car chases and all the rest of its stuff. So when you're out there for entertainment, you are not. It's not. Let's just talk about me and the work I do and the messages I want to tell. In front of the fire background, wearing my suit on a firewall. Now, this is important because I know that one of the primary reasons of doing this is to encourage people like you and to keep you sane and make sure, you've got some arguments and explain things to people and all the rest of that kind of, passing ammunition kind of thing. But in terms of converting people, I have to drag them by the scruff of the neck and basically hold them here and talk to them for 5 or 6 minutes and hope that they'll stay that long. And that is so different. That is so different than going intentionally someplace. I'm going to take my consciousness and I'm going to put it on that boat with Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss and Roy Scheider. When we go to see Jaws, I'm willing to go and be on that boat. And when you have people in that position, you can hit them in a way that you simply cannot hit them if you're just trying to come in through the front door. And I'm tired. I'm tired of watching the left, just do this. Hang on, I'm just reading comment. So, yeah, I'll get to that in a second. I know how to do these things, and I don't know of anybody else on our team who knows how to do these things. And I decided after 10 years of I don't want to say it in a contemptuous way, certainly, but preaching to the choir, essentially, changing some minds and winning some people over, but mostly doing it for people who are already on the team. After 10 years of this, I've decided I would like to do something about that map that is so blue. I want to go get votes. I want to change people's minds. And I can't do that as famed international white supremacist Nazi Bill Whittle. I need to get them hypnotized, the way you always hypnotize yourself when you go and see a movie or television show. And I mean to do it. And that's why these messages are so powerful. I don't know if I'm sure I must have, but I want to bring it up again because it's a great example. The first one is a message about gun control. The first video is basically I'm doing 8 minutes of flash so I can have the guy say, people are all murdered and there's a no guns allowed sign. The guy walks in and says, I guess somebody didn't read the sign. I want to show people how absurd this is. I don't want to lecture them about their constitutional rights. I've done that and I know how to do that. I want to show people how absurd it is to think that this is a gun-free zone means that you're safe in here. I just want to show bodies on the ground. I want to just show bodies on the ground, and I want to say, I guess somebody didn't read the sign, and I want people to feel, rather than think, I want them to feel, yeah, that is a little bit stupid. But an example of the kind of messages, because somebody asked about what kind of messages we're talking about here, an example of the kind of messages is one I thought of not too long ago. And if I've already told this story a little while ago, let me know. And then we'll go back to the personal questions. But here's the thought process. I'm looking at all these 3D models and characters, and these artists are producing these characters, getting better and better and better. And I saw the face of one of them that I thought would be right for this project I'm doing. And this project starts out with a guy named John Boyd, based on the real John Boyd. And he's getting 6 new trainees. And I thought, okay, the 6 new trainees, I'm going to make them all different colors, his executive officers, black, and so on. And I thought, do I want to make any of these 6 trainees women? Because I am so heartily tired of watching movies that tell me that, that women are just out there, kicking these 220-pound guys. And we've had this conversation 100 times. But at the same time, I personally know several women in the military, and I've seen them at work, and they're exceedingly competent as long as they're not actually trying to pick up, a 400-pound guy and wrestle him to the ground. They're superb. So I decided I was going to have one of these 6 pilots be a woman, and I have a CG character whose face I like for this. So here's the issue. So I had to ask myself this. I had to say, okay, I've talked on this show again and again and again about these irreducible differences between men and women. So where's the conservative answer to this? Because the left says that if we talk about the difference between men and women, it's because we want women back in the kitchen and all the rest of this nonsense. And I certainly don't want that at all. And at the same time, I don't want to see the United States Marine Corps turned into a social experiment with people that are going to get them killed. And I did not say those letters, by the way. At least I don't think I did. Okay, so what do I do? So here's my problem. All right? Here's my problem. How do I personally explain what I think the conservative position on women in the military should be? Now, I could get up and I could talk about it and I could do the lecture thing and all the rest of it. But what I realized was that in the 3rd episode of this thing, this guy Boyd, the squadron commander, is going to be at an office working late. And we've seen a little bit of the 6 new trainees. And he's in the office working late. And there's a knock on the door, and he says, "Come in." And it's the young woman, and she's in uniform. And she says, "Sir, I was wondering if I could get a moment of your time." He says, "Sit down." And she says, "Captain, we've been on a couple training flights now, and I saw it during my entire time at the academy. And, sir, the guys they're faster than me. They're just faster than me. They can take a tighter turn as well. They're faster than me, and they seem to be able to orient themselves better. And I want you to show me how I can beat them." And this is precisely what he's looking to hear. So he says, "Yeah, it's true. Men have faster reflexes. They're stronger. They're physically faster. And the part of the brain that in women goes to facial recognition and social connections, in men largely goes to 3-dimensional visualization. Men can read maps usually better because they have the same reason that women can tell when somebody's upset. The evolution has favored those particular aspects, and I'm not saying anybody should be limited by those, but they're there. So this is my approach to this problem. So she comes in and says, these guys are physically better than me, and I want to beat them. How do I beat them? That's the essence to me of the whole issue. It's individuality. It's not victim. It's the opposite of victimhood. It's the opposite of lowering standards. It's the opposite of quotas and minimums, and it's the precise opposite of that. And so he says, "Well, that's an interesting question, Lieutenant. The young men that you're in the same squadron with have a lot of biological advantages over you. But because they have a different biology, you're really asking me, what disadvantages do they have? Because they're different. What disadvantages do they have?" And he says, "I can tell you one of them, because I see it all the time. They are so aggressive, and they're so pumped, and they're so full of adrenaline and testosterone that it's a very common, fatal mistake to become so fixated on killing your target that you forget to watch out that you might be somebody else's target. It's called target lock. And target lock is, fatal." And he says, you're not going to have that to anything like the same degree. In other words, you're going to be able to remain above what is driving them on a biological hormonal level into suicidal maneuvers and bad decisions. And he says that means that you should be able to keep a better situational awareness than these guys. At the very least, you will not have this attack, kill ego so driven on getting this other guy that you end up getting killed yourself, or worse than that, your wingman, and so on. So he says, so I think we ought to work on that. And over the course of time, she becomes his favorite student, and she becomes a very good pilot. She is already a good pilot. But to me, this is exactly how I want this conversation to go in the real world. I don't want people saying, as they did in the beginning, it's not true anymore. There are excellent, excellent, excellent women fighter pilots out there, and this is why I'm putting one into these movies. So what? How do we explain what I think is the morally and intellectually correct position? Well, in this little 30-second scene, what I've done is I've said, yes, there are biological differences between men and women. Yes, there are. And yes, they have many advantages over you. Now that we've got that out of the way and not had to pretend like it doesn't exist, how can we use that to your advantage? Because of your attitude. Your attitude is superb. As a corollary to this, the best of the young pilots coming in, the guy with the best simulator scores, Boyd is utterly convinced that this guy's going to go out there and be so aggressive that he's going to get himself killed, because you can fly aggressively in a simulator, because if you make a mistake, you just reboot. And so basically for the first 5 missions, Boyd takes his number one recruit and says, I'm very concerned that you are going to fly out there the way you fly in simulators. I've seen your scores, and I think that's probably going to get you killed. So I've decided that for the first 5 missions, I'm going to send you out there with the rest of the squad, but I'm not going to give you any ammunition. We're not going to take the guns off the ship, because sometimes just having them there is important. But you're not going to have any ammo for 5 missions. You're not going to be able to attack. You will not be able to attack. And the guy just gets completely lit over this. But to me, it seemed to make perfectly good sense. If you're so aggressive on the kill, to the point where you're losing your ability to save your own skin, then the way you cure people of that is to put them in a world where they have to be purely defensive all the time. And I just think this is fantastic. I think it's just great. I think it's the way to deal with these issues. And aside from this little snatch of dialogue, we don't have to tell people. We get to watch them. We get to see it happen. And we get this sense that this person is not some miraculous, Ray who's born, with all these incredible. No, she is working her way hard, and she has the attitude necessary to overcome some initial disadvantages. This is my entire life message. This is what it comes down to, and I get a chance to do those kind of things in a way that people will see, and they'll see with their guards lowered. So, anyway, enough about that. Sorry, I know it's a personal question night, but that was a big one. Yeah, let's see what else we got. Craig Schlevy asked the only question that I've said that I'm aware that I think it's the only question I've ever taken that I just won't answer. So we'll move on. And I'm just not afraid of it or ashamed of it or anything. I'm just not going to answer it out of respect for somebody else's privacy. So we go to Dave Olson. And I'm sorry about that, Craig. So Dave says, we know that conservatives are quick to be vilified from doing those things which are prerequisites for being a liberal. During your bachelor years as a pundit, do you suspect that someone ever tried to get you set up in a honey trap or other kind of compromising situation? Honey trap is where they send somebody, some cute-looking woman, and if they're really clever, they know exactly what your preferences are, and they know what you're going to fall for. And then the idea being that basically they send somebody your way to be your girlfriend, and the person's a spy. That's all they are. And they're trying to get you to the point where you'll lower your defenses and say what you really believe. And then people, especially when that's recorded, then they'll have you. And the answer to that, Dave, is it has occasionally occurred to me, but I never thought of it as a serious risk or a serious possibility, because number one, I don't think I'm that important. But much more importantly than that, I think I'm immune to those kind of traps. And I'm not immune to them because I'm immune to good looking young women. I'm immune to them now, but I wasn't then. What I'm immune to, I think, which would make this whole thing an exercise in futility for the people that wanted to go to that kind of trouble. What I think I'm immune to is high-level hypocrisy. In other words, if somebody were to steer somebody my way and having them posing as a romantic interest try to get me to lower my guard, certainly they could do that. There's no question about it. But when I lower my guard, I say what I really mean. And I'm one of those people, fortunately, who says what he really means all the time. I've said many times, the best thing about being a conservative is I get to say one thing and do the same thing. So there's not going to be a moment where they're going to get me on tape saying the things that they think I say. It's just never going to, it's not going to happen because I don't believe them. And this is why the left is the left. They like these kind of ideas. And they'll always, always, always say, well, he doesn't really believe it. He's just saying that for cover, He's, oh, well, it's all this talk about Booker T. Washington and how well the black students did. That's just to cover his racism. And I start to ask myself, at what point does this become absurd? In other words, let's say you're an Archie Bunker, worse than that, you're David Duke, okay? You're a stone cold KKK, Aryan Nation skinhead, racist. Okay, that's what you are. Now, how far are you going to go to cover that? My experience with these people is that they don't try to cover it at all. They're very proud of it. But does this mean that this guy would let his daughter marry to a black man and then have a black grandchild and then put that grandchild through school and college and change his diapers and take him for the weekend and teach him how to play ball? How much cover is there before you realize it's not cover at all? It's just absurd. It's ridiculous. But since their entire lives are based on saying things that they don't believe, in fact, they're saying the things the opposite of what they believe in order to get political power, they worry about these things, which is why all of these undercover things are always stings on the left. I've never seen one on the right. I've never, ever seen any, which tells me, by the way, it's an interesting point here, Dave. You haven't seen behind the scenes footage of Rush Limbaugh or Ben Shapiro or anything like that contradicting themselves. But the thing that I just the second realized is it doesn't mean they haven't tried. I think they've tried, and I think they've found, no, we got nothing here. And you would think that would be enough for them to realize that they're evil, horrible, nasty bastards who are inventing evil in other people, and when they don't have any evidence of it, they'll manufacture evidence for it. But the short answer to your question is I don't worry about any attempts to get past my defenses, because my defense is to not have a defense. That's my defense. It's not just a defense, it's immunity. I say what's on my mind all the time. I believe these I think these positions are not only morally sound, I think they're morally triumphant. And if it ever is pointed out to me by somebody with a different experience that something I'm saying or doing is just plain wrong or offensive for reasons other than being the truth, then I will adjust my position. But I'm not worried about that. They're not going to get anything on me not because they can't get to the real me, but really because the real me is pretty much exactly like the me that you guys know. Moving on, Eric Blake. Hi, Eric. Greetings, Bill Whittle, Vectron of the Aurora Star Republic. Hail, Vectron. Do you have a secret talent you've never made public? If so, number one, what is it? Two, show us proof or it didn't happen. Ha. I will do the first part. I'm not going to do the second part. I might have done it once or twice before, but I'm not doing it now. All my life, I've up until, let's say, 2-3 years ago, I've always just completely believed myself to be tone deaf, tin eared, musically incompetent, absolutely cannot play any musical instruments whatsoever, nothing. And then I was just humming along on the radio with somebody who was an actual voice instructor in the car, and she turned on the sound and she said, "Can you give me that back again?" And I hummed it again. "How about this other song?" I hummed that again, and she said, "You have perfect pitch." So what is? I've heard the term before, but I didn't really know what it meant. I thought it meant that you could sing a perfect note and keep it. She said, you can reproduce the tones perfectly because you hear a clear distinction between the tones. And that really changed a lot for me. So actually, there are times when I actually sing a little bit. As a matter of fact, I've been spending a fair amount of time with Evan Sayet lately, the four of us, me, Natasha, Evan, and Evan's ego. And we, and his wonderful partner, Karen. And Evan started singing. We'd had a couple of drinks by this point. He started singing, and the right stuff, all the oldies and not oldies, but just pop culture stuff from when we were younger. And I just joined in, and I mean, you have to ask Natasha about this. I'm certainly a better singer than I thought I was, and I'm a better singer than I used to be. And there is one song, which is Come Fly With Me, which I've practiced probably 100 times in the car. And having rehearsed that, having never rehearsed anything else, but having really put effort into getting that one song right, I can sing that song pretty well. And the reason I'm not going to do it now is because I require a small bit of lubrication in order to get that to happen. So yes, my secret talent is that I can sing a bit, and also I can play drums. And that surprised me too. Playing drums is like the closest thing I've ever experienced to playing drums, and I think I had to do it first. Sorry, Bone Canoe says, if somebody plays a note on the piano, can I tell what note it is? I cannot. So maybe I have relative pitch, whatever it is. I can't do that. But in any event, I can remember songs with a great degree and repeat them with a great degree of tonal accuracy. So no, I'm not one of those people where you go, ding, ding, that's C sharp. No, that's not me at all. I didn't mean to claim that. So maybe that's not the term I'm looking for. Anyway, back to what was I talking about? Drums. The closest thing that I ever had to playing drums, and I think the drums came first, was flying a helicopter. If any of you out there are helicopter pilots, as well as fixed-wing pilots, the dirty secret about a fixed-wing airplane is if you take your hand off the stick, it'll fly better probably than you're flying it. An airplane is inherently stable and will fly very, very well on its own as long as you've got it trimmed up. Without an autopilot. I mean, they're just stable and they'll go where they're pointed and they just fly all day. You can just completely relax and do what you need to do. But a helicopter, you're flying 24 hours a day, all the time. And hovering especially, because you can make a 100-foot altitude error when you're at 6,000 feet, but when you're at 5 feet, that 100 altitude error can cost you dear. So when I was learning to fly helicopters, it was impossible, in the same way that riding a bike is impossible, until suddenly it wasn't. And I can't tell you that it wasn't one of these things like, oh, I'm getting closer, no, I couldn't do it, and then suddenly I could. And that's how I remember learning how to ride the bike, and that's how I remember learning how to play the drums. And the problem with the drums is, first of all, you need a good sense of rhythm, which I apparently have. As a matter of fact, just since you asked, I've often toyed with the idea of starting the Michael Bublé version of "Come Fly With Me" in another room and recording me singing it a cappella from memory and see how close they are on the timing. That would be interesting to me. I get the feeling I'd probably do a 3-minute, 4-minute song. I'd probably be within a second or two, would be my guess. Might be wrong about that. Anyway, it turns out I have a sense of rhythm, and And so when you're learning how to play the drums, you have to you have to take out what has always been coordinated motion between your hands and your feet, and you have to break them all into individual components. It's difficult until you practice to make your left foot tap to a different rhythm than your right foot. And it's difficult to make your left hand and your right hand do things that are, completely different. And to have them all four going at the same time is impossible, and then it's not. So I also play drums badly. And by the way, I only played with live musicians 2 or 3 times. This place called Gunner's Garage in Gainesville is a mechanic, and he liked to work all night. And he had a loft in his 5-car industrial garage. And up in the loft there was a drum set and a couple guitars. And people just come over, and he'd just stop working on cars, and he'd basically go up and play for half an hour, and then come back work on his cars again. His job as a mechanic. And I was up there, and somebody had a second drum set or something, and I was there with my friend Steve Stipp, who has always been a musical genius. And I was playing drums, and this other guy was playing drums, and he was doing all of these fills. I don't know how to do any fills. I just never got that much instruction. But I could hear us going out of rhythm, and I remember thinking, man, I am screwing this song up. And I talked to Steve about it afterwards, and he said, no, man, you were spot on. This guy was it's his count was off. You were right on. You were rock solid, and that made me unbelievably pleased. So I don't play very good lead drums, and I don't have any skill or flourishes or anything like that. But I can keep a beat. And one thing I've learned from being a very, very poor drummer who's only taken, 4 or 5 lessons in his life, is I've realized that a drummer can not only keep a beat, but a drummer can put the energy into this. The drummer can put the charge into that song. A really switched on drummer can put momentum and energy into the song just by the way he plays. And it's like driving the beat. It's like you're pushing the beat into this song, and you're giving it energy, and everybody knows it. A couple nights ago, I was up in a wonderful place, probably my favorite place in LA, called a Vibrato Jazz Club. It's hidden away right up on the top of Mulholland Drive, and it's owned by not Sergio Mendes, Herb Alpert. It's wonderful, and we've listened to a number of jazz bands up there, and a number of live musicians and so on. But I was in that room for 20 seconds, and I said, "This is the best drummer I've ever seen." I want to say his name was Matt Phillips, and he looked exactly like. He looked exactly like Gene Kranz. He looked like a mission control director. He was wearing a buzz cut. He looked like an engineer from 1967. And the whole band was wearing skinny ties and everything. And this guy had the most practical, level face. I mean, the guy just looked like a electrician, electrical engineer. And I was in there for 20, 30 seconds, and I said to Natasha, I said, this guy's unbelievable. It's so crisp. It's like if all of the drum beats that people normally play, so beat, 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 and there's a little variation in time window, he doesn't have any. It's spot dead on, and it's just so crisp. I couldn't believe it. And then he did a drum solo, which is unbelievable. But drum solos are showing off. When you can hear that degree of crispness and precision, that's the word, precision. I was just completely blown away, and I went up to him between sets, and I just said, I just got to tell you, you're the best drummer I've ever heard, and it was immediately clear to me. And he was very, very nice about it. And he was awfully good. Okay, moving on. Aloe Conson. Hello, Aloe. Does your inner warrior ever find himself wishing the left would just stop denying their intentions, get it over with, and start their putsch against us? Yes. No. Let me clarify. Um, the idea of the left declaring its intentions is the end of the left. It's just that simple. If progressives ever started openly saying what they actually believe, we talked about this earlier, they're done. So I don't think that will happen. When I said, was I looking forward to it? Yes. And then I said, no. I'm not looking forward to a shooting war against anybody, especially against other Americans, no matter how different we may have become over time. But when I said yes, here's what I meant by the yes, Allah. Yes, I would like the left to come to the realization that they are messing with the people who are heavily armed, and they're not. I think it's about time that they begin to understand that these harassments and beatings and burning of campuses and stuff is done by people who are afraid of a potato peeler against people who go out and my wife was, when we started shooting, she was putting 800 rounds a day downrange, a day. So I would like them to realize what they're up against, and they're going to push it. And there's already been a guy went hunting Republicans on that softball field and so on. If that had been a conservative, we'd still be hearing about that story every night. But this is also a convenient answer to the question of what do you need your semi-automatic rifles for? And whenever we talk about why we need the right to defend ourselves, we always say, well, criminals and foreign invasion and so on. But I'm not worried about criminals. I have a 45 for criminals. I have an AR-15 for something completely different, and it's not to stop criminals. And I'm not too terribly worried about the British coming back. The reason I have the rifle is because I have seen what the left does, and they're doing it now. They launch these attacks, and the first thing they do is demonize conservatives to the degree where they've called us Nazis so often that it's okay to punch a Nazi. In fact, it's kind of expected of you. It's heroic. So I suspect, I don't know. I don't know whether it's going to get violent or not. I just don't know. But I do know that if it does get violent and they break the seal on the conservative behavior, once they take us out of the protective wrapping, then it'll be over very, very quickly. And what I mean by that is I think the American people are the most decent, well-intentioned, generous, friendly people in the world. And there's a problem with that. And the problem is that enemies think that you're weak because you're friendly and you're trusting. They see that as weakness. It gives them the sense that you're lazy and stupid and fat and slow and all of these things. So it gives them a temptation to attack you because they're so convinced that your friendliness is just plain weakness. And when I say take off the wrapper, we haven't taken off the wrapper since 1945. Not all the way. If it turned out that there was some kind of massacre or something, and it came to the point where it's like, okay, this is what you forced on us. Now it's serious. When you get there are no better fighters and no more fearsome enemies than decent, friendly people who are angry. The people who are slow to anger, very slow, are the people who will once you get that, once you break the seal, and they realize, okay, this is it. This is war. Once you break that seal, it's over for the enemy. It's a matter of time. Somebody was talking about the Civil War. During the Civil War, a Northerner and a Southerner, and they were discussing, prisoner exchange, something, I don't remember. Or maybe it was just before the war, actually. It might have been politicians just before the war. But in any event, a Northern, maybe it was a Northern senator, I don't remember the source, but let's say it was a Northern senator, is talking to a Southern senator, and the Southern senator is talking about war and secession and all the rest. And he said, sir, you Southern gentlemen are very fiery, very temperamental. You're like a brush fire in dry country. Burns very bright and very hot, and then it burns itself out. He said, we Northern people are like a huge boiler filled with cold water. And it takes an awful lot of fire to get that water to the point where it's steam. But if you do it, it will generate so much power for so long that you won't know what hit you. And I think that's it. Yeah, and J.C. Pershing says, basically makes the point that is apparently lost on them. If we were as evil as they say that we are, they'd all be dead now. And by the way, guys, I've mentioned this before. If you haven't figured it out by now, you should know the reason now why the left wants to control guns. They want to control guns because as long as we have guns, they can't control us. Not all the way. They can do the nonsense they do to me in California and fine for the plastic straws and so on. But if I ever felt that my actual personal fundamental liberty was at stake, I'd be out of here faster than I could fire a few shots just to hold them off as I make a run for it. They just don't want us to have guns because if we have guns, they can't tell us what to do. But that's the whole motivation. That's all of it. All of it. So let's see what we got here. I'll do a few more. Thomas Braga Hennebrey. Hello, Thomas. Would you ever consider teaching video editing and or film structure and story for an online university geared towards young conservatives wanting to shape the pop culture? If so, how would you teach it? Great question. I could certainly do it in all of my free time. But that is the kind of thing that I would make a serious effort for. I don't remember what the name of it was. It was on the Speakeasy show that we did that I like very much. It was just too expensive to do. And I talked about the problem with conservatives is this. I had gone to see a Michael Jackson show in Vegas, and this person in this incredible mask floats in on this crescent moon, and then in the middle of the show, your attention is focused on the stage, and then all of a sudden, on the sides of this enormous theater, there are 4 Michael Jacksons on each wall, and they're moonwalking up the wall. They're moonwalking up the wall, backwards, up the wall. I went, oh my God. Incredible. That's just beautiful. And instantly, I started looking for how they did it. And I could see, okay, so obviously there's I got it now. There's a computer-controlled mechanism up there that's bringing them up, and you can almost see the winch. There's a little sign of their body harness here. It's pretty well disguised, but it's just, if you really know where to look for it, and real thin wires, and dark in here. So people like us immediately see something magical, and we try to decide and try to figure out how it was done. That's what practical people do. But what I would like to do is I would like to teach conservatives how to not see the wires. Not how to see the wires. We're good at how to see the wires. How to not see the wires. And that may sound strange to you because they're not visible, and they're not, unless you go looking for them. But by looking for them, you are taking an artistic experience and turning it into an engineering experience. And this is what we do, and it's what we're comfortable with. And it's a mistake. It's a mistake in terms of the big picture politically. This is why we can't reach people emotionally the way the left can. And it's a mistake in terms of the richness of our own individual lives. Because if we spend our lives analyzing the technique of art as it's happening, then we don't get to experience the art. Learning how to not see the wires is going to what I was talking about in the beginning, is understanding, yes, we know that it's not really Michael Jackson walking the moonwalk up the walls, because that's impossible. Yes, we all know that. But we've come to this theater with the willing suspension of disbelief, and we are going to have to pretend that we don't know how it's, not even pretend that we don't know how it's done. We just have to stop thinking about it. Just enjoy it. It's an incredible thing to see, is these, 4 and 4, these silhouettes with the hats, just walking up a wall backwards. It's unbelievable. And I'm sorry that I immediately started looking for how it got done. And that practical part of my brain and your brain is what separates us largely from the lower animals, like chimpanzees and progressives and so on. And that's good, but it is a problem. The inability to use and feel and see emotion. I've talked about that when I talk about using emotion and showing people dead bodies rather than talking about murder and all of the things that I'm trying to do. We think that emotion is bad because the left uses it to cheat. And we don't do that. But I've never seen a 4th of July parade with veterans walking by holding up the flag where I didn't start crying a little bit, I've never seen a high performance jet demonstration, F-15 guys or 16s or 22s at an air show. Never watched them without just weeping from the sheer joy of it, from the sheer exuberance of it. And we need to do more of this, because it's not only better for us politically in terms of getting our message out there to the world, it's also good to let the head sleep for a while. Just put it away. If you want to figure it out, go see it a second time. But anyway, that's that. So I would love to do something like teaching guys how to edit and how to shoot and stuff. The editing especially. Editing is a talent that I didn't even realize existed until I developed it to a pretty high level. And the kind of editing I'm talking about here is, before I started doing this, while I was writing Eject, my job was to take anywhere from 40 minutes to maybe an hour and a half of raw footage on 4 cameras synced up and get that to 23 minutes and 30 seconds on the dot, to the frame, to the 30th of a second, to the 29.97th of a second. I would deliver finished shows to the frame. It was just a point of pride for me. Now, that may sound relatively easy, but what it basically means is you have an immovable steel wall at the beginning of the show. That's when the timer stops. And there's another immovable steel wall at the end of the show, which is 23:30 in that particular case. And everything between then, all of this stuff has to fit into here, and it has to fit into there in a way so that people don't know that there was anything else ever shot. In other words, it should look like the cameras were running for 23 minutes and 30 seconds. And that's difficult. The first part of it is you have to have a sense of story. I'll listen to, take anybody. I've cut shows that were starring Clint Eastwood, Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise, all of them. And I'll listen to them talk for 45 minutes or an hour on the raw footage. And I never took notes, and I never had a script or a paper cut or anything. I just listened to them. And as I'm listening to them talking, there's a part of my editor brain that's going, and then they'll get on something. It's like, remember this is good. and then they'll kind of get off topic again and drift around. Then they'll come back to something, and then they'll drift around, and they'll come say something else that actually belongs with the first part. And I'm kind of doing this in my head live, and I'm, like I said, I'm not taking any notes. I'm just thinking where he starts talking about Fight Club. That's very good, and so on. So then you basically get it down to 30, maybe 28 minutes, and we do that by something called a radio cut. This was something that surprised me. When editors cut, like a TV show or a movie, they don't cut the picture, they cut the sound. And there's a reason for that, which I'll explain to you. We call it a radio cut because if you watch it, it's nothing but jump cuts. And sometimes it's in the middle of a sentence. I was going to the store the other day and I found that, and when you're watching it, your eye is being tricked, but if you just listen to it, it's seamless. If you can get it to sound seamless, then the rest of it's very simple. When you get to because you had somebody saying something here and ended period, and then they said a whole bunch of nonsense, and then they said something cool here. So I take out the nonsense, put those two together. Visually, there's a jump cut from one to the other, but audio-wise, it's perfectly smooth. And you can do something like do a cutaway to some other person listening to cover that cut, or you can simply cut from camera A to camera B, and you will never, ever know, if the guy's good. I watched Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine, and I had heard about what he had done in some of these interviews. And if I had Michael Moore talking for an hour, I could make him say anything. Dave Big Booty has an interesting question here. Did I ever try to make someone look like a jerk? Let me tell you about the times I was tempted. We had Michael Moore on that show 3 times. You may remember Michael Moore. It was the 2004 election against Kerry, and things were looking pretty bad, and I despised Michael Moore with every atom in my body. I think he's a filthy liar, a terrible liar, a good liar, but I mean a terrible human being. And he knows he's lying in order to make a point, which is inconceivable to me. I can't, and to you too. We can't understand it. We just can't. We cannot understand that there are people out there who intentionally lie about people being Nazis or racists or pedophiles or whatever simply to get power over them. It's inconceivable to us, but he does that. And we had him on the show 3 times, and the third time it was a couple weeks before the election, and I was so tense about the election. And what he said about President Bush was so obnoxious and so wrong. It was, this whole species of, they're the freedom fighters and all the rest of this stuff, And I watched the raw footage, and I had an assistant there, an assistant editor and producer. And I watched the raw footage, and she says, "Okay, so you ready to get going?" And I would just start to do the cut, and I looked at this thing. I said, "I got to go for a walk." And I walked around for half an hour. So the answer to your question, Dave Big Booty, is this. I could have done it. I could have done it seamlessly. And I didn't do it because Michael Moore does that for a living and I don't. I'm getting paid to do a job. My bosses are hiring me to produce the best TV episode I can possibly produce. And I don't get to steal from them by inserting my opinions in that position. So I have wanted to, and I had the ability to, but I didn't. Let's see. Christopher Dale Goodwin. My question is, what the hell? I live about half an hour from a compound that was discovered in New Mexico where a man was training children to commit mass murder at schools. A dead body was found on the compound as well. The judges in the area are very liberal. It's Texican. Texican, I'm going to skip that one. And the reason I'm going to skip it is it doesn't strike me as a personal question. Steve Darrow. Sorry. Love you, Texican. You're a great guy. Upstanding member of the Aurora Republic. But I really do want to keep it a personal question so I can go off on my wandering sprees from at least from some premise like I outlined in the beginning. If you want to bring it back up again, I'd love to talk about it next week. Steve Darrow, I've watched many of your speeches and started wondering about your process for developing the structure of your speeches. I realize you have plug-in modules from which you build the larger speech, but do you occasionally screen test the modules and the larger thematic tones of the speech with some feedback mechanism, or do you self-critique using the audience response? Do you rewatch older speeches to see what works or what doesn't? No, I don't do any of those things. You're right about the plugins. I have developed over time, and I developed it real early. I mean, really almost the entire time I've been doing this. In fact, the entire time I've been doing this. If I'm going to go up and speak for 45 minutes, I will write maybe 3 or 4 index cards of notes. And each one of those is a module. And I've got hundreds of them, if not thousands of them. When I say it's a module, it is the best form of the argument that I can make. And I know that argument. And so it's not a question for me of what's inside the modules. I know the argument about, free speech. I know the argument about all these other things. Not what's inside them that matters to me. It matters whether or not they need to be in this particular speech, and if so, in what order. And probably the closest thing that comes to it, I think, the only thing I've ever really thought that reminded me of the process was the beginning of the Mission Impossible TV show, where Michael Phelps starts every single episode sitting at a desk or in a couch and his whatever. And he's got this giant portfolio, and they're playing, doo, 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 doo. And he's looking at these black and whites. No, yes. Oh, look, he's pulled out the strong guy name. I forget what his name is. Oh, look, he pulled out Barbara Bain's picture. No, no, yes, no, yes. Oh, Barney, yes, of course. And so basically he's pulling the pictures of the people he needs for that particular mission. He always pulls the regulars, plus 1 or 2 guest stars. And that's kind of what I do. I like to, if I have enough time, and I almost always do, this may seem a little strange, but in fact, all of the time, I arrive at the event not having any real idea what I'm going to say. Sometimes there'll be about a specific topic that they want covered, but that's extremely rare. I don't know exactly what I'm going to say. I don't know generally what I'm going to say. And I find that if I get there early enough, especially like a dinner event, and Natasha's seen me do this several times now, and she's kind enough to just, let me be. Because if it's a dinner event and I'm on in half an hour or 20 minutes, I'll be looking around the room and I'll be trying to listen to people and trying to understand what they're talking about. I'll listen to them at, cocktail parties before. I'll talk to people about, what's going on, and I will put together a speech based on that. And then in the time before I go on, I'm usually sitting at the dinner table with my pen, and I'm writing a series of 1-line notes. Jim Phelps, not Michael Phelps. Thank you, Eric Blake. So I really like to have a feel for the room. I generally have needless to say, I have some idea what I'm going to talk about. I mean, I remember probably the most structured speech I ever did was one of my all-time favorites, actually. And it was a speech I gave to, is it AFI? It was in Dallas, and it was about magical thinking. It was the speech that talked about the Loch Ness Monster. And I liked that speech very much because the modules made a story. And I try to make a story, but that story I thought was particularly good. There were lots of moments in that speech that were ad lib, and just in a sort of a strange way, I'm a little bit ashamed about this because if I'm saying something and I think of something funny to say, I'll put it in, and it usually gets a laugh. And if it gets a laugh, it stays in. And I guess I've just got the skill to deliver it in such a way that it sounds like an improvisation. And it feels a bit like cheating. But the reason that comedians do the same sets every night, and musicians play the same tunes. The reason that I put things in there and keep them if they work is because there's only one best way to tell a story, and I will not tell a substandard version of it just to comfort myself by saying this is not what I was saying last time. But with that said, they're never the same twice ever. They're never even close to each other twice. Just a couple of the ad libs I remember being a little bit surprised about. Well, not even surprised, just tickled about. I remember during that Dallas speech, we were talking about the left and something. It's like, they're violent and so on. And they've got the media, they've got the radio, the TV, we've got the guns. Hooray! And it just brought the room down. And it was just kind of a shock to me. There have been moments where I came up with answers to questions I thought were pretty quick. The only ad lib that I can remember recently well enough to be proud of it was the one speech I did that was I've done it two times now. The first time I pitched this video game idea, and I was showing pictures of these robotic dancers at this club called SIDS. And SIDS is a place where you purposely blur the line between humans and robots. So some of these women are obviously, in fact, the star, it's like in the advertisement, 100% biological. And so I've got all of these renderings of these very sexy women and these very sexy robots, and half women, half robots. And I've got this up on the screen. I'm tabbing through them. I'm looking out, and the greatest standby line I've ever heard. I heard it when I was 16, driving through a town in Florida. Somebody said, the average age of this town is deceased. And it's my favorite joke ever. And it goes a long way to my love of the audiences that we get, that I can go into a room full of old ladies and say, look, I mean, I've done 100 Tea Party events, nothing personal, but, I look out here in the room and, the average age is deceased. And everybody laughs. In any event, so I've got this very conservative group of, I don't want to say little old ladies, but conservative Orange County people of stature. And I'm looking up at the screen at all of these really super hot renderings, and I get the feeling that people may be a tiny little bit uncomfortable. And I said, so look, folks, I can't promise you that these videos are going to make these kids conservative, but I can promise you it'll make them into heterosexuals. And it was just a good line, and I've used it since then. And then I talked about the fact that, we use, when I say sex, I mean this in the most general sense. As a species, certainly as Americans, we use sex to sell everything. And the simplest form of this is you could have a woman who's doing a commercial for life insurance. So there's no vamping, but you've got a very attractive woman spokesperson or a very attractive male spokesperson. The only time they go against that is if they're purposely going against the grain. But just by using attractive people to hawk their products, they're using sex to sell their product. Because you just have a natural attraction and appeal to people of the opposite sex or the same sex. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But you have a natural appeal, and when you're presented with those things, you're inclined to like what good-looking people say. So we don't touch this. And the kind of using sex to sell that I'm talking about is actual. It's obviously not actual sex, but they're going to a strip club. And because there are so many, because you never see a female naked, although you do see naked robots, but they're clearly robots. And I've said before, the biological motions of these mechanical objects, the last one I did is just the skeleton structure of the thing. It's like the Terminator skeleton doing this, sexy dance. It's jarring. But no one ever uses sex to sell conservatism. And another line I liked a lot is, I said, some people can make conservatism interesting. Very few people can make conservatism interesting and funny. But making conservatism interesting and funny and sexy, I just can't do all this on my own. But it's true. So I've got, and when we get to Switch, hopefully next week, I can finally start showing you some things. It's been a long time since we've lost the old thing we've done several months on this new crappy free version of this software. Don't date robots. Yeah, robotophobia. I have a friend of mine who does the voices of Lure and he does Kiff, great guy. So I've got a strip club, and the reason I've got a strip club is because I've been to strip clubs, and if you're a young man and you like science fiction and you're by yourself playing a computer game, then a science fiction strip club is nirvana. Now you've got them. You've got them. They're interested in the science fiction part. They've never seen that before, but it's actually sexy. No nudity. It's just sexy. And so it's just such a powerful weapon. And I was saying a second ago that hopefully next week I can bring some pictures in. I did a stretch where I did nothing but create characters. I was learning other stuff and I'd gotten the character creation down. And I spent a couple weeks finding models of people that I liked, making adjustments to them, getting the right clothes for them, getting the right attitude for them. And I did a composite picture of the people in this Area 18, the street people that I put together. And it's just utterly fantastic, if I do say so myself, because it's not, I had this one guy. This is how the process works. He looked a lot like Johnny Depp, and I thought, you could put whatever hair you want on him, but some of the renderings I saw by the character were with long hair, and I thought, okay, so this guy's going to be, I thought he was going to be a male prostitute. So I put him in, I gave him like this weird makeup, tattoos everywhere. I put him in like leather pants and just like a real thin kind of a vest. And I was doing a test render, and for some reason or another, the eyes were rolled all the way back on that test render. And when I saw the first frame of it, I said, my God, this guy looks stoned out of his mind. And then I realized that's much more interesting. Much more interesting. So this guy's just plugged full of this future drug, walking around, and that adds color to the world. You go to a city, you don't see people like us. I mean, we're there, but if you go out at nighttime, you're going to see the freaks. Natasha's experience in Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard, it's a circus. It's a freak show, and it's interesting. It's entertaining, and it makes you want to watch. So I've got the scenes on the street, which are very Blade Runner-ish. Blade Runner designed the future. Blade Runner, Aliens, one or two others. And that sense of like 40s film noir thing means you've got to have characters who look dicey. And this is the point I'm trying to make. So I've got these 6 dancers in the club, and then I've got 20 street people. I've got essentially a heroin addict. He works for us. He's a conservative. I have an underage. Well, she looks underage. I have an underage street walker. She's part of the conservative message now. I've got security guys. They're all conservatives. I've got any number of ladies of the evening. They're all dressed. One of them's made up like a Ouija board. She's a conservative. They're all conservatives. All of these computer-generated characters that are so dramatic and so interesting and portray characters so different than we are, they're all conservatives. They all work for us. And when I realized that, I really got excited about it. I really did. I said, okay, so now we're going to have the Johnny Depp character working for us. And this very angry girl with a severe haircut who's, dressed in very skimpy clothes, just a look from her expression and the way her face was built. She had a face that was just a very, very realistic, very, not a pretty face at all, just very rugged and so on. And she's furious. And she works for us too. And the way she works for us is this. She's standing on a corner. Our two guys go by. She looks at them. They're not interested. She sneers, mutters something under her breath. And as the guys walk along, Boyd says to McCullough, he says, "How old do you think that girl was?" And his friend says, "I think she's old enough to know better." And just from the look on his face, it's like, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. You know? He says, well, maybe somebody ought to notify the authorities, like the Navy or something. Maybe they could do something. And some line like that in a kind of an arch way because they're naval officers. But they all, you look at any one of these and it's like, got it. I've got one guy who's also real skinny looking kind of a character, and I made him even thinner, and I made him really short. And I gave him green hair and gave him kind of this whole punk thing, but there was something missing from this guy. I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I realized he needed like some kind of cool glasses, so I gave him like these really weird sci-fi glasses, and I realized, well, why isn't anybody else wearing glasses? And then I realized it's because this guy is watching the world through the drone that's hovering over his shoulder. And when the guys walk behind this guy, he's facing in the corner, and as he turns his head, the drone turns its head too. And then they turn back to their illicit business. And that's just cool. I had a character I liked. Boyd looks a bit like John Brown. He doesn't look scary like he used to. He's much younger, much better looking. I'll bring all this stuff hopefully next time for Twitch. So many times I'll put together a character that I just plan on having a street character, and there's something about him that's so good. It generates not only dialogue, it generates a really good little transaction. That's a term we use for those of us that are educated in the arts of the theater. We talk about, and I had a great acting teacher. I really did. I was not a good actor, but I had a tremendous acting teacher. I learned so much from him. And a lot of this is Stanislavski and so on. But basically, in a nutshell, the way they talk about screenwriting and drama and acting is a series of beats. A beat is a time period within the scene. All of these things happen within the scene. The scene is the setting. You're in the bar at Cheers. It's nighttime. That's the scene. But inside that scene, there are a number of different beats. And the beats are, we're going to focus on these guys, we're going to focus on these guys. And then inside the character's own speech, there's beats because what they're doing, the term we used was transactions. And we were taught that all human behavior is essentially a transaction. And what it comes down to is, what does this person want from that person? What do they want? And how are they trying to get it? Are they afraid of them? Are they afraid of them by acting afraid? Or are they afraid of them by acting tougher than they really are? What's the transaction? What's the dynamic? So I had this, there weren't many old characters. I had this really old guy, model of an old guy. And I put him in like an orange jumpsuit. I thought it might be like an old miner, and then I realized, no, this guy's too old to be a miner. It's hard work, hard physical work. He's got to be a janitor or something. So I gave him a couple of high-tech pieces of gear to make him look like a space janitor. And I was just going to have him in the corner of one of these buildings as our guys walk through it, on the way from the landing pad over to Sid's. And I'm having them walk through the city specifically so I can show these people, specifically for that reason. And this guy's face, I'm looking at this guy's old man down there with a literal pail and a scrub brush in his hand, you know, kneeling down. And I looked at this guy and I thought, man, what would this guy say if he were going to say anything? And my first thought was he would say to these guys, hey, you guys got to smoke? But there's not open smoking there. So instead of going, got to smoke, he does this. He got any stims for stimulants? And Sledge, the exec, says, no, man, we don't have any stims. And as they're walking away, this old man says, Navy guys, huh? And that stops him. Boyd turns around and he said, how could you tell? And he's, I'm just inventing this on the spot in the shower one day. And the old man says, I used to be in the Navy. Served aboard this ship. And then he goes back to scrubbing. And as he's walking, and as our guys are walking away, under his breath, he mutters, you know, he does mutter actually. He kind of calls after them as they're walking away. He said, "Yeah, I used to be somebody," and Boyd hears him, doesn't turn around, and Boyd says to himself, "Yeah, I used to be somebody too." And I love it. I love it. There's so much in that 10-second transaction. You've got a government that has abandoned its warriors. You've got a person who's fallen from decency and routines of work and family and marriage, and now he's at rock bottom. He's scrubbing the basement. He's looking for drugs, and he used to be in the Navy. And it's suddenly he's not a cartoon anymore. He's not just a guy. He's a guy with a story. And what that story tells me and tells the audience, the reason I like this story is because this whole arc of the first season is Boyd and his executive officer and some of the pilots deciding to leave the United Earth Empire, which is the existing government in this Star Citizen world. They decide they're going to leave, and they're going to go leave, and other people, bigger people, are starting to form a country. What does America in the future look like? If I want to talk about American values, what does it look like in the future? So we had to build America in the future, and that meant that these guys had to leave their old allegiance, which, let's say they were British naval officers. They decided they're going to fight for the colonies. So I had to have a reason, and I have to have a lot of reasons for them to leave. And I could have put them in a room and said, the empire, No. I don't have to do that. I don't have to have, tell me, Professor, the empire seems to be falling apart. No. I've got a guy who used to be a naval officer scrubbing a floor, and he's a drug addict now. And that tells me a lot about that society and about its military and how they take care of its military. And this is why I get so excited about this, because this stuff just comes to me. It just comes. The stuff just writes itself. So, T.G. Gecko says, how does a government maintain an empire if it abandons its soldiers? Precisely. You have hit the nail on the jackpot. Precisely. You see, I didn't have to tell you. I didn't have to lecture you. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to give speeches. I didn't have to talk about the founders. I didn't have to have a tell me professor moments. I didn't have to do anything. I had a guy on his knees asking other guys for a cigarette, essentially. And from this 10-second transaction, I've already set up what this world is like and why it's not a good place to be. That's why I put these teen prostitutes on the street. That's why I have these hookers and these drug addicts. I have these things in this video to set up the fact that 5 or 6 videos from now, they're going to leave to start America, and they're going to leave specifically because this society is falling apart. And I can just do it. And anyway, we'll do one more. Oh, look, it's known miscreant Matt Lloyd, who I should say, by the way, Matt and Vipercheck have kept this ball rolling, the two of them, with me way AWOL. Matt and Foghorn have leadership meetings every week, and I'm there 1 out of every 6 or 7. I'm just too busy working on this. But for a known miscreant, he's really quite a fellow, and he and Foghorn have put an awful lot of energy into this, as has Simon Says and Merlin and Captain Jackson, all the rest of these guys. There's just a lot of people out there who have really gotten the message and done an awful lot of this work. I got the website, and I did all the graphics, aurorarepublic.space, if you like. And I got the thing looking like because to me it was very important, the graphic elements of this country, this republic. It may not sound right to people like us, but it had to be beautiful. It had to be beautiful. It had to be, the colors had to be, it's not a sky blue, it's not a cyan, it's not as deep as this. It's its own kind of almost like a Bermuda water blue, almost like a purple blue. And the lettering is very low and very wide, but very soft, and all of their departments have the same fundamental logo. It's the Aurora Starburst, and then there's something in front for Department of Defense and different things for the Office of the President. All the rest of it. I just loved doing it, and it took me months. So it had to be attractive, and in order for people to be willing to fight for something and die for something, you not only have to give them you got to do the carrot and the stick, right? You give them the carrot, you can live like a human being. By the way, a major point of all this, and Boyd is the guy who points this out, because the relationship between Boyd and McCullough is very simple. McCullough, Sledge, is Jiminy Cricket, and his job is to protect John Boyd from himself. Because Boyd's a poet, and Boyd's emotionally up and down, and Boyd gets into all kinds of trouble, and Boyd doesn't have the good sense to shut up when he should shut up. And Boyd is the warrior poet. That's what Boyd is. That's what Boyd was. He's a scholar warrior poet. That's him. And Sledge's job is to make sure that nothing happens to him, not only because he's his best friend, but because he knows he's important, that he means something. He's going to be important, despite the fact that it looks like his career's already over. So it's Boyd who basically looks around and says, and if you look at any movie, certainly if you look at this computer game or any other computer game, Boyd is the kind of guy who walks into a room and says, we've been in space for 1,000 years now. You think by now we would have figured out how to hang a picture on a wall? I don't find that to be technologically overwhelming. And my favorite thing, this is going to be a running joke. I'm not going to overplay it, but I'm going to use it a lot. The future, the dark Blade Runner future, Aliens future, that dark kind of dystopian future is very dark. And certainly the game indoors is very dark. And it's a very effective thing. People in darkness, you can't see what's coming. So it gives you a lot of opportunities for suspense and good storytelling. But it's dark, very dark. And nobody ever comments on it. And I want him to walk into one of these rooms, and it looks like any other science fiction room anywhere else ever, and have him say something like, "Can we get some lights on in here, please? Can we please turn on some lights? We have fusion power. Can we turn some lights on? Would that be all right?" And this kind of common sense kind of thing makes him quirky and makes him kind of square, but also makes him interesting. Interesting. It's the conflicts, it's the weaknesses, it's the blemishes, and I'll get to your question there, Matt, that make a character interesting in terms of the writing. And one of the things that I've discovered in the year that I've been working on this is that there's been an enormous leap in the quality of these figures in terms of looking real. And I can see this model was made before and this one was made after. It's crystal clear. It's a level of believability. And what that level of believability has been, it's not a better renderer or better skin shading. It's just that now when they make these characters, they make them with blemishes. They make them with real skin. And everybody looked too perfect before. But once you see a couple of moles or freckles or just a scar or something, you just believe it. The one thing I did with these characters, when you buy a character, it looks like a certain thing, and I like the general look. It's a high-quality model. It's a believable model. I'll take it, and then I'll make it my own. I'll start playing around with cheekbones and eyes and all the rest of it. But the one thing that I do all the time, unless I'm dealing with one of these dancers, is I can't describe it to you. You just have to see it. But these models have sliders that control things like size of your nose, ear position, everything imaginable. Some of them have 15 sliders just for the corners of your mouth. And the one thing I always do with these characters is there are two sliders, one for left face asymmetry and one for right face asymmetry. And I send one way and one the other way, and you get this perfectly symmetrical face, and it just starts to shift a little bit. This eye on me is considerably lower than this eye, which is why this is my good side, and this is the side I always have to present if I can. And this side I don't like nearly as much. That's why people have a good side. If you're filled with vanity like I am, obsessed with trivia, people who are on camera and who do this for a living have a good side, and my wife's particular skill is she knows how to find the good side of people who don't know what their good side is. I say this because the the effect it has on the character is subconscious, but looking at a computer rendered character with an asymmetrical face is on some level massively more convincing than looking at a perfectly symmetrical face. And Matt, I'll get to you. This is the problem with computer animation. And one of the reasons why it looks so bad, and this is certainly the hardest thing that I'm trying to overcome. And the problem with computers is that everything is too perfect. If I set the camera here on frame 0 and I set the camera down the hall on frame 200, it's going to take that distance over the 10 seconds that I've given it and divide it up into 200 equal pieces, and it's going to do them at a mathematical level of precision. There's not going to be any dolly bumps. There's not going to be any camera bumps. There's not going to be any nothing. It's just perfect. It's all perfect. And you have to degrade this stuff in order to make it real. And if you want to really look at what, this is several years old now, but I think certainly the first place I remember, I'm not saying the first people to do it, but the first place I remember going, wow, was when they redid Battlestar Galactica. What was it, 2005, 6, somewhere in there, 7? And what they did in Battlestar Galactica was brilliant. They had computer-generated battles, but they would film them like they were handheld, and they'd do a crash zoom, the kind of zoom you would make if you had a real cameraman, and then something happened, zoom, and that crash zoom and that sense of motion utterly convinces you that this is something real that's being photographed by a person on the scene. So these little things are fascinating to me. I just can't get enough of them. So last question, and then we'll call it a night, from known miscreant Matt Lloyd. What would evil twin Bill's life look like now if he was doing everything you were doing but on the left? Well, first of all, I should have said this probably at the beginning of my career. I am the evil twin. The question is not what evil Bill is doing. What is the good Bill doing? I hope he's miserable. I hate that bastard. I really do. I just hate him. So I'm the evil twin. A lot of the sensitivity I have on issues and stuff has been beaten into me by 2 or 3 decades of abject poverty and excessive loneliness. But I was politically neutral during that time. So I guess if I were to ask you what a left-wing version of me would be doing today, well, there is no left-wing version of me anymore. All of the qualities that make a fine progressive have been beaten or burned out of me, for which I am eternally grateful. And when you find yourself standing in a spotlight of grace that you certainly didn't deserve, you have nothing else to do about that rather than be very humble and just say, thank you. So the best I can do to answer that question, Matt, is to say, is to go back to when I was a little bit political. That was when I was in college, and I was definitely a liberal. I will not describe myself as a left-winger. I just can't get there. I believed a lot of liberal things. I voted for Walter Mondale because he was going to raise taxes and all of this stuff. But I can tell you what I would not be doing, and that is I would not be doing political punditry, because to the degree that it's me, you know, evil me, good me, it's still got to be me. I just have respect for the truth. And when I was much more liberal, it's because I didn't know anything. And I got all jazzed up and all hyperventilated about things I knew nothing about, nothing. I remember so clearly when Reagan was elected, I thought, okay, he's a tough guy. And I thought that meant it's the end of the world. We're going to have this nuclear Armageddon. He and Gorbachev met in Reykjavik. And after it's over, we find out that they had essentially put disarmament on the table, that they were talking about cutting virtually all of their nuclear weapons, all these missiles, all of it. And Reagan would not give up Star Wars. He would not give up the Strategic Defense Initiative. And I remember clearly clearly remember thinking that was it. That was our last chance. That was our last chance to avoid this future. And if you're of a certain age, you know what I'm talking about. If you're younger than a certain age, you should be grateful, because I can remember from the time I was very young to 1991, I did not think that there was going to be a future of any kind. It was going to look like The Road. If you want to see a superb movie, I mean a really great movie, watch The Road with, oh golly, what's his name? Oh, I'll zip my tongue. Viggo Mortensen. It is the most depressing movie I've ever seen, but it's just terrific. It is very depressing. And that's what I thought the world was going to look like. And all of these things, I was screaming and yelling at the TV. That idiot, what have you done? Just like I hear people doing today. But I know things now that I didn't know then. And one of the things I know is, if you're going to negotiate with tyrants and murderers, you can't just take their word for it. And I also learned that the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was the plan to put all these orbiting space-based lasers and was going to cost trillions of dollars, as I recall, at Reykjavik, Gorbachev wanted Reagan to give up laboratory experiments on Star Wars. Reagan wouldn't do it. And that cost them the treaty. And I thought it was the end of the world. But what I did not know at the time, because I was too stupid to think it over and too stupid to ask, what I did not know was that it wasn't that Reagan was a stupid old man like I thought he was. An actor, playing the president, as I remember what people would say around. But the Strategic Defense Initiative was designed to destroy the Soviet Union. And it did. Because the Strategic Defense Initiative, trillions and trillions of dollars of this super high technology, bankrupted the Soviet Union. What somebody said to Reagan somewhere, and I'd love it if somebody knows a little bit more about it, but somebody said to Reagan, "Sir, we are talking about fighting the Soviets with tanks and jets as they come through the Fulda Gap in Germany, and it's just a question of time for when we're going to have to use tactical nukes, and if we use tactical nukes, that's probably going to be strategic nukes, and this is the future, and this is the world." And somebody said to them, "Mr. President, we spend about 3% of our gross domestic product on defense. Soviet Union spends 25% of their GDP on defense." He says, why are we talking about fighting Russians with tanks? The Russians are fantastic with tanks. They're very, very, very tough soldiers and good soldiers. Why are we defeating them on their battlefield? Why don't we fight them on our battlefield? We're the richest country in the world. Our economy's 100 times the size of Russia's. Why don't we just beat them where we're good? We can beat them in the field, but why don't we beat them where we don't have to fight? And so the Strategic Defense Initiative, which seemed so ridiculous to me at the time, although being a space guy, I thought it was very cool, and I certainly thought it was achievable, not against 25,000 warheads, but doable. The Strategic Defense Initiative was designed to put the Soviet Union in a place where they would have to spend so much money to keep up with us that their society would fall apart, because they were on the edge, and talking to my wife, had been on the edge since certainly the 70s, early 70s, and probably earlier. My wife is young enough to have been grown up in the Soviet era, and she had to go to these Komsomol meetings and listen to these lunatics talking about how great Lenin was in socialism and how evil America is and so on. And she told me, I kind of was thinking, well, did people rebel against this? Were they angry? We weren't angry. We just didn't care. Nobody took it seriously. Nobody believed in it. It was like going to a church service in a religion you didn't believe in. We all nodded. We said what we had to say. We did what we have to do, and then we went home and had a good time. We knew that all of it, this marching down the streets with these pictures of these mummies and all the rest of it, it's just nuts. They wanted to watch American movies and all the rest of that stuff. So somebody was able to figure out that at 25% of GDP, they were basically on the edge. And if we put something on the table that we would not give up, and if this thing was so expensive, and most importantly, if it was something that the Soviets had to match, then you could bankrupt them. And the genius of SDI was that it wasn't an offensive weapon. There was no offensive, I'm sure there could have been, but there was no offensive capability built into it. It wasn't like we're going to build this super bomb, and so now Russia has to build a super bomb. It's much more difficult than building a weapon. Building the defense against nuclear weapons is infinitely harder and far more expensive. And it has the added benefit of being a defensive weapon. So who's really going to complain? We're saying, well, we're just trying to protect ourselves from incoming nuclear warheads, so we'll build this thing for $7 trillion or whatever. And the Soviets realized they're going to have to match that, because if we have an impenetrable nuclear shield and they don't, now nuclear war becomes conceivable again. But it was never intended to be what they said it was. It was a giant bluff. It wasn't a lie. It was a bluff. And Reagan held his cards when he could have put them down, because he didn't want a tie. He wanted to win. And I genuinely believe that Ronald Reagan not only didn't want war, liked and respected the Russian people, loved the American people, would have done what he had to as president. I think that was clear. But he genuinely wanted us out of this. Somebody's told me that when Reagan became president, he was given advice on maintaining the Cold War and containing the Soviet Union. He says, why don't we just end it? You know, why don't we just end it? It's been going on for 40 years now. How about we just put an end to it? And he was determined to do that, and he did it. I'm convinced the historical evidence shows that he did it. And he did it without anybody getting killed. And I might have said this once or twice before, but if you want to know who won the Cold War, there's evidence. Ronald Reagan in a gulag, breaking rocks at age 80, that's evidence that the Soviets won the Cold War. Mikhail Gorbachev doing a Pizza Hut commercial is evidence that we won the Cold War. And I remember the news reports. First, the Soviet Union fell, and we were watching all this stuff. And I remember the news reports. And after the Soviet Union fell, not too long after that, there was an announcement made that said that Russia is no longer targeting American cities, and America is no longer targeting Russian cities. I don't know what that means exactly, but whatever it means, I remember hearing that and go, really, yeah, they can retarget them, but they're not sitting in the tubes ready to come to Miami or Los Angeles or wherever else you happen to be. They've taken the ammunition out of the gun and put the ammunition on the table. They can still get to it, but it's not a loaded gun anymore. And I thought, my God, we might actually get out of this. Looking back on it now, as I said, I think last show or 2 shows ago, I suspect that nuclear war didn't happen because it was genuinely unthinkable. That it was simply, we did talk about this whole deterrence thing and pushing them and stuff. It was so awful, and remains awful, that the idea of an existential war with the United States against anybody is almost inconceivable now. You have to ask yourself, let's take China. We're much stronger than China militarily, but if we were to go to a full-on shooting war, wrapper-off war with China, what possible benefit could there be for either us or the Chinese to incur that kind of loss? It is a different world because of the power of your friend, the atom bomb, that has kept you safe, because it kept people scared. You were one of the people, but they were people who who are scared too, and some of those people are not very nice, and having them be scared of us is good. And none of this occurred to me, Matt, when I was in college and a liberal and screaming and yelling and crying and wailing. I look back on those years. I feel very much like I did in that story I told a little while ago. Looking back on what I believed as a liberal reminds me of looking back when I was 5, which is Evan Sayet's entire thesis. He's brilliant at it, by the way. I can remember the feeling of going into the living room, pulling up one of the cushions on the couch, getting underneath it, and then putting the cushion on top of me, and believing that my parents didn't see me. And my parents came into the room saying, "Where's Billy?" "I don't know. It was a whistle. Did you see him?" "No." And I was 100% convinced that they couldn't see me. And that's how I feel now about the time I spent when I was a progressive. I know things now I didn't know then, and it makes the couch adventure into a lovely memory of parents that were having fun and doing the right thing, and it makes the college memory into a lesson and a fair amount of shame. I feel like I have a fair amount to atone for. Nothing on the order of David Horowitz, for example, who was a key part of the left. I mean, just a major center axis part of the left, and he's certainly doing his best to pay it back. But the simple fact is, I had much less. I would say 2 or 3 orders of magnitude less information then at my command than I have now. I think a much more interesting question is not so much what would I do if I were to go back and talk to myself at 20. I think if I went back and talked to myself at 20, I could convince myself to be a conservative. What interests me is what would happen if I were to come back from 30 years in the future? Would I have a different opinion? In other words, is this the final resting stop for my philosophy? And the fact that I think about this, and when I never had those thoughts when I was younger, convinces me, no, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think in 30 years I'm going to look back on being a conservative and saying, what an idiot. Because that's how I feel about being a liberal. My philosophy is based on the truth. You show me some new data, some new facts, I'll change my opinions about those certain things, but everything else that I've seen is committed to the truth. And human nature is what it is, and these are universal, eternal truths, and I believe in them, and it's great. So yeah, that's that. I think that's one of the reasons why I understand these people. Whatever uniqueness I have in this trade, in this strange trade that I find myself in, is that I'm personally the best example that I know of these overlapping Venn diagrams. So I wanted to be a pilot and an astronaut, engineer, nuts and bolts, cold-blooded, right stuff, discipline, study, all the rest of it. That's the engineering right brain circle. Is it left brain? I cannot remember anymore. No brain. And then over here is acting, showmanship, storytelling, delivery, humor, impact, timing, font choices, color choices, and that aesthetic sense for the details that I learned as a storyteller. And I have these overlapping to a significant degree, where I've been both the engineer and the actor kind of guy, and I can speak to both of them. And the dead honest answer is, having spoken to and lived among both engineers and actors, both conservatives and liberals, the truth is that conservatives are much better people, but liberals are much more interesting. And they're more interesting because they're mentally ill. But it is interesting. You go out to a dinner with a bunch of writers and actors, and it's entertainment, all right, for sure. But they're not very good people, as a general rule. Oh, and one last thing about this evil twin thing. I certainly don't personally know, and I don't know of a person who has been a conservative, really understood it, and then become a liberal. But virtually all of my friends have gone the other way around. Virtually all of them. Evan Sayed, and I don't know if Prager was or not, but Dennis Miller, all of them, virtually all of them, were liberals, and then they saw things, and then they became conservatives. And it's been fun watching Kanye West go through this process, because he was just on Kimmel or something. He said, "No, black people don't need to vote Democrat." Kanye West, during that little period there, was reading Thomas Sowell. And so now Kanye West does not believe in the Democratic Party anymore, when he used to. And the reason he doesn't believe in them anymore is because he now has the information of Thomas Sowell to go against the information given to him by Noam Chomsky. And Kanye West has an ability to reason obvious truths out if he has the cultural honesty for it, or maybe it's just the ego big enough so that he can take the abuse he took. But watching Kanye West is like watching me and everybody else I know, wake up. Yeah. So anyway, I think that'll probably do it. It's 8:30. I'm going to set up a render, as explaining to my lovely and beautiful wife, who I believe is watching this right now. I love you, honey. I'll be home soon. That with this deadline looming, I have a computer at home and I have a computer at the office. And if I go to sleep without them rendering something, I feel like, it's a strange business, this computer graphics. You sit and work on a file and get everything just the way you want it, 5, 6, 7 hours, and it's finished. And then you have to wait anywhere from 8 hours, 6 hours, 3 days to see whether it turned out or not. So I'm going to put a couple files on the fire, and then I'm going to leave. It won't take long. All right, so that'll do it for this episode of the Stratosphere Lounge, brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com, who are responsible for the electricity that we burn here. They're responsible for the Amtrak trips that my wife and I take on little vacations, and they're responsible for all of the messages that come out of this studio that I love so much. And to members especially, thank you. And I appreciate the patience. And I hope and expect that I'll be able to show you something that will live up to the time and effort that I put into it. So that'll do it. And now we're going to push the series of buttons, and we're going to say goodnight to our Facebook friends. We're watching this on glorious 720 HD. This is the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next time.